your book, you talked about, I see it feelingly.
Yeah.
You're speaking to Gloucester.
Yeah.
Now, are young actually seeing the world in a more feeling way? Or is the use of social media causing a confusion between feeling and wide-ranging emotions, and it's been externalized as anxiety? You talk about steps for parents to manage and handle the anxiety of their young.
Yeah. I think, first of all, parents must give themselves an incredible clap on the back that their children can see the world in a feeling way. You know, when I was hearing all this talk about millennials and snowflakes, and I was watching that, and I was going, that's an incredibly pejorative, labels to be throwing out at these kids. And I was, as I was listening to, and I wrote about it a lot in my column for the Examiner, I was saying, when we label our kids like this, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because we're the ones who created these kids. These snowflakes didn't happen in a polar vortex. It wasn't something that was just a vacuum. We raised them to be able to speak their minds, so we parented them in a way that allowed them to talk about their feelings, which is a great thing, right? So again, I think our children are seeing the world in a more feeling way, but I think that I suppose we always maybe saw it in a feeling way, but we didn't really express it so much because we didn't think it would be validated. Where I see it kind of maybe going over to the extreme, maybe, is that we're over validating everything, and then all of a sudden, in our society, let's say, we have an incredible awareness of mental health. And yet you could say there's an epidemic, as you said, of anxiety. There's an epidemic out there, of anxiety. I mean, kids are presenting to, I'd see incredible amounts of anxiety. Why is that? And I'd say, well, they're not as resilient. I don't think as resilient as they used to be, because I think parents have an error in their thinking, and they believe to help their child with the issue is to be a good parent. And, sometimes the majority of the time, standing back and allowing your child to manage the issue for themselves is the real gift of your parents.
To
feel the failure and help them manage the failure. And and I would say a real key skill is to reframe it from failure to something else. We all fall short at times. None of us get everything we want. We have to be able to manage that. And so if we feel that in an incredibly, deep way, it's not going to be productive for us going forward as an adult, because, yourself, Teresa, you don't get everything you go for. You don't get every promotion. You don't get everything. You're not successful in everything you go for. So you have to develop a skill very early on in your life of managing things, and the difference between a child who's resilient, and this is the debunking the resilient myth. One child isn't born with resilience, and one child isn't born with an absence of resilience. It's just one child is taught how to be resilient, and one child is taught not to be resilient. We model it for our kids.
Yeah. So, while some parents may be guilty of using the game as a parenting tool in many ways, and giving in to the child, they are unwittingly allowing them exposure to extreme violence and all sorts of pornography, etc., which really steals something at an early age, which, would you agree, is not, you can't retrieve it really once it's in.
I do. And especially, I suppose, I'm an advocate again. I'm a teenage advocate, child and teenager advocate, and pornography is something that I talk a lot about, because I can see how destructive it is, and violence is very destructive for a child's mind. Not everybody who views violence and pornography, it's important to say, will become, interested in violence and violence and sexual violence against women. That's just the reality. Not everyone's going to be like that. But if there's a seed of vulnerability in there, if there's something in there in the child, and they view something really destructive, it can really start the genesis of this very pathological road that they go on. And so I think it's really important that we manage this with our children. And there are ways to limit what they can access on their phone. There are ways. We're not powerless. I suppose the biggest mistake we can make as parents, because we're immigrants and digital immigrants, we can say, well, I don't understand the game, I don't understand the phones.
That's where the conundrum lies. This is where the parents nearly attach a sort of a sophistication to their children's know-how with it.
Exactly.
And they fall into that pit of letting them off at it.
Exactly. And that's a very dangerous, it's like letting your child off into the city on their own and saying, go off there now and have a good time for yourself there at 6. And,
I know.
And it's worse than that, because, you're letting them off into the globe,
Yeah. So where does the responsibility lie for heightening the awareness among parents and educators as to the downside of technology? Where does is there a need for an overarching umbrella, a type of governance ruling about it? Or how is it going to be got to, unless by people from like you or like myself on the ground
Mm.
trying to heighten awareness, but that's not enough.
Well,
We
we
need
can't expect the government to parent our children, right?
no,
We
no,
can't expect the government to parent our children. We can't expect the school to parent our child. We have to parent our own children. We've brought them into the world. We've made a decision to bring children into the world, and so we have a responsibility to, you know, to mind and to give, nurture them, and to give them the guidance they need as they go through this sinuous journey through life. But also the government has a responsibility, I think, around things like pornography. They have a responsibility to make it more difficult for our children to be able to access it. When I was a kid, if I went into a shop, in my local shop in Cork, I'd have to walk down to the village and ask the shopkeeper for a pornographic magazine. You'd never dream of ever doing that, because he'd be like, "Hello, Richard, how are you?" He'd know your family, and you know, you'd never do
that
anything
was
like
the
that.
control in ways. Yeah,
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 exactly. But also it was 18s to get that, so you'd have to be 18 to get it. But now you can be 6 or 7 or 8, and there's no one watching you. So we have to, as a society, say to our government here, look, there needs to be a policy here. We need to make these people who, these, you know, these platforms that design these things, they're not going to make our children, you know, put their email in. They want the money, they want the advertising, they want to have as many more clicks they get, the better, because that's more advertising for them. So they're not going to do it. So we need to bring it in, and we need to policy this thing. But we also, as parents, that's one area of it for our government and for our schools. The schools have to have policies around accessing pornographic material and when the phones can be accessed and all the rest of it. Schools need to have that as well. But as parents, we need to teach our children. This is the crucial of it, the real crux of it. We need to teach our kids to make the right decisions when we're not around. How do we do that? By how we parent them,
yeah.
right? And
From the outset.
from the outset.